Clint Eastwood, a name that had long been synonymous with grit, rugged determination, and a timeless American spirit, had always commanded the public's attention on the silver screen. Known for his roles as a no-nonsense hero, a man who faced down adversity with a steely gaze and a calm demeanor, he was the embodiment of the tough, resilient character that Americans admired. Yet behind the glare of spotlights and the accolades of Hollywood, there was a side to Eastwood that few knew, a man who carried with him memories of a time when he, too, had witnessed the cost of war firsthand. Before the fame and fortune, long before his iconic roles were etched into the annals of cinematic history, Clint Eastwood had served his country. Stationed at Fort Ord during the Korean War, though not in the heat of battle, he had experienced the quiet discipline of military life and the bonds that form among those who serve together. It was in these moments, teaching fellow soldiers essential survival skills and lending a supportive ear to those far from home, that Eastwood learned the value of loyalty, honor, and compassion. Years later, when Eastwood's name had become synonymous with legendary Hollywood portrayals of heroes and warriors, he found himself increasingly drawn to the plight of those real-life heroes who had been forgotten by time. Among them was James "Jim" Calloway, a former Marine who had once served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan, only to return home to a life filled with unexpected hardships. Jim's story was one of valor and tragedy. In his youth, he had fought in distant deserts and tumultuous battlefields, earning medals and commendations for his bravery. Yet the cost of war was not measured solely in the medals worn on his chest. The horrors of combat, the sleepless nights haunted by memories of fallen comrades, and the struggle to reintegrate into civilian life had left deep, invisible scars. Once a proud soldier who had dreamed of building a future, Jim found himself slowly losing ground to despair. The promises made to him, a nation that revered its veterans, had faded into bitter reality as he battled PTSD, unemployment, and the crushing isolation of being forgotten. On a chilly evening in Los Angeles, fate conspired to bring these two lives together. It was a night like any other in the sprawling city, with neon lights flickering against the dark sky and the hum of distant traffic serving as a constant reminder of life moving relentlessly forward. In a quiet corner of a less-traveled street, near a modest community center, Jim sat on a weathered park bench. Wrapped in a threadbare military jacket, he stared blankly ahead, lost in thoughts too heavy to voice. His worn boots and weathered face told a story of sacrifice and suffering, a story that had long been overlooked by a society in constant pursuit of the next headline. Clint Eastwood was driving home after an evening spent away from the relentless pace of Hollywood. Intent on avoiding the usual distractions of celebrity events, he opted for a quiet drive through the back roads of Los Angeles, a journey that would soon alter the course of two very different lives. As he passed by the park, something caught his eye, a solitary figure slumped against a bench, his gaze distant and burdened. There was an unmistakable aura about the man, a hint of military bearing that even the years of neglect couldn't erase. Without hesitation, Eastwood parked his car. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel, and approached the man. "Mind if I sit down?" he asked quietly, his voice low yet resolute. Jim glanced up, startled to see the legendary actor before him. For a long moment, silence reigned. Jim's eyes, though tired and haunted, reflected a flicker of recognition, a shared understanding of sacrifice. "Sure," he murmured, unable to mask a trace of disbelief. Sitting beside Jim on that cold bench, Eastwood studied him carefully. "You served, didn't you?" he finally inquired, his tone gentle but direct. Jim hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I was in the Marines. Iraq, Afghanistan. I did my time." His voice was rough from disuse and laden with memories that seemed too painful to relive. Eastwood's gaze softened. "I've seen too many heroes forgotten by the very country they defended," he said, almost to himself. "I know what it's like to carry scars that no one else sees." In that quiet moment under the starlit sky, Jim sensed something different in the man before him. Here was someone who wasn't there for spectacle or fame, someone who understood the true cost of sacrifice. As the cool night air settled around them, Eastwood continued, "I'm not here to offer pity. I'm here because I believe every hero deserves a chance, a real chance to rebuild." Jim's eyes narrowed slightly, a mix of skepticism and desperate hope churning within. "Why would someone like you care?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eastwood smiled, a gesture that held no trace of self-importance. "Because I once saw someone extend a hand to me when I needed it most. And I refused to let another hero slip away into the shadows." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a promise. That night, over the course of a quiet conversation, Clint Eastwood made a decision that would forever alter the course of Jim Calloway's life. He arranged for Jim to receive the care and support that had long been denied to him. Eastwood's help wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was delivered quietly, behind the scenes. He facilitated access to veteran rehabilitation programs, ensured that Jim had a safe place to stay, and connected him with community resources that could help restore a semblance of dignity and purpose. For Jim, these gestures were nothing short of miraculous. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. With Eastwood's discreet support, Jim started attending therapy sessions, gradually confronting the demons of his past. He was introduced to fellow veterans who shared his struggles, and slowly he began to understand that he wasn't alone, that there was a network of compassion waiting to catch him when he fell. Yet, for all the positive changes, Jim kept his gratitude secret. He knew that the man who had turned his life around preferred to remain anonymous. Clint Eastwood's intervention was not meant for headlines or public accolades. It was simply an act of quiet kindness, a promise fulfilled in the dark where few ever looked. As months turned into years, Jim's new beginning flourished in small, meaningful ways. He secured a modest apartment, found steady work at a local veteran outreach center, and began volunteering to help others who had been sidelined by life's cruel twists. His story, however, remained hidden from public view, a silent testament to the power of one man's compassion. In the background of this personal renaissance, Clint Eastwood continued his illustrious career, never once mentioning the secret that had so profoundly impacted one forgotten veteran. Yet, as fate would have it, the truth has a way of surfacing. In time, whispers of a mysterious benefactor, someone who had quietly intervened to save a life, began to spread through veteran communities and social circles. People spoke in hushed tones of a legendary actor who had once lent his hand to a downtrodden hero, and how that single act of kindness had sparked a ripple effect of hope. The details were murky, and for years the story was passed along like an urban legend, a secret that was never meant to be public. But as the years rolled on and the nation's conversation about veteran care and mental health grew louder, the truth began to claw its way into the light. A persistent investigative journalist, delving into the untold stories of America's forgotten warriors, stumbled upon Jim's journey. With painstaking research and quiet interviews, the journalist began to piece together the extraordinary tale of how Clint Eastwood had intervened in the life of a struggling war veteran. At first, the revelation was met with disbelief. How could a man as famous and enigmatic as Clint Eastwood choose to remain in the background, offering help without seeking recognition? Yet, as more evidence surfaced, old photographs, confidential records, and heartfelt testimonials, the truth became undeniable. For Jim Calloway, The unveiling of his secret benefactor was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, he felt immense gratitude for the lifeline that had been thrown to him when he had nearly lost everything. On the other hand, he struggled with the exposure of a personal story that had meant so much to him, a story that had once been safely tucked away in the quiet corners of his life. The narrative of Clint Eastwood's quiet heroism began to spread. It captured the imagination of a nation that was increasingly aware of the struggles faced by its veterans. Social media erupted with tributes to Eastwood's unheralded act of kindness. Veteran organizations hailed him as a silent guardian, a beacon of hope amid a system that often overlooked the very people it was meant to protect. Yet, even as the truth emerged and the nation celebrated a forgotten act of compassion, questions remained. Would the public's newfound admiration for Eastwood translate into real change for veterans across the country? Or was this just another story that would be celebrated for a fleeting moment before fading into the backdrop of political rhetoric? As the night drew to a close on that fateful evening when Eastwood had first approached Jim on a lonely Los Angeles street, it became clear that the seeds of hope had been planted. The quiet act of kindness had set in motion a series of events that would not only transform one man's life, but also ignite a broader conversation about how America treats those who have sacrificed so much. And so, as the first chapter of this unfolding drama came to an end, the stage was set for revelations that would shake the foundations of public opinion. Revelations that would eventually force the world to acknowledge that even in the realm of power and celebrity, the human heart could be moved by the simple desire to help a fellow soldier. For years, Clint Eastwood's act of kindness remained hidden, known only to Jim Calloway and a small circle of people who had helped him rebuild his life. Eastwood had never sought publicity for his generosity, and Jim, out of deep respect, had never spoken of it beyond whispers to a few fellow veterans. But fate had other plans. As Jim settled into his new life, working at a veteran outreach center, mentoring young servicemen struggling with PTSD and adjusting to civilian life, small details about his story began to surface. At first, it was nothing more than a rumor in veteran circles, a mystery benefactor who had changed one soldier's life forever. Then, one evening, an investigative journalist named Mark Turner, a man who had spent years covering the failures of the VA system and the struggles of American veterans, came across Jim's name in a report about veterans who had successfully overcome homelessness and PTSD. Turner had made a name for himself by exposing the injustices veterans faced, and when he stumbled upon Jim's case, something felt different. He scheduled a meeting with Jim at a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles, intending to hear his story firsthand. Jim arrived, dressed simply in a leather jacket and jeans, looking every bit the strong but weathered soldier who had endured more than his fair share of battles. Turner ordered a coffee and leaned forward. "Your name came up in my research about veterans who beat the odds. I want to know, how did you do it?" Jim hesitated. He had always been careful about what he shared. But something about Turner's genuine interest made him consider telling the truth. Finally, he sighed. "I had help." Turner took out his notepad. "From who?" Jim exhaled slowly, debating whether or not he should reveal the secret he had kept for years. "Clint Eastwood." Turner froze. "Clint Eastwood? As in the Clint Eastwood?" Jim nodded. "Yeah. The same guy you're thinking of." Turner couldn't believe what he was hearing. A Hollywood legend, a man known for playing tough, lone wolf characters, had been helping a struggling war veteran in secret? And no one knew about it? This was a story that could shake the nation. "Tell me everything," Turner said, flipping open his notebook. Jim spent over an hour recounting his journey, his struggles, the night he met Eastwood, and the quiet generosity that followed. Turner listened intently, writing furiously, his mind racing at the impact this story could have. A celebrity using his fortune and influence, not for publicity, but simply to do the right thing? That was rare, almost unheard of in Hollywood. Turner wasn't a gossip journalist. He wasn't interested in clickbait. He wanted to tell a story that mattered. The next morning, his article was published. The headline, "Clint Eastwood's Secret Act of Kindness, the Story He Never Wanted You to Know." Within hours, it exploded across social media, news outlets, and morning shows. Clint Eastwood, a silent hero? The shocking truth about Clint Eastwood and a homeless war veteran. A Hollywood legend's hidden generosity changes a veteran's life forever. Suddenly, everyone wanted answers. Reporters flooded Eastwood's publicist with calls. Fans shared the story, praising him for his selfless act. Veteran organizations hailed him as an example of what real patriotism looks like. And yet, Clint Eastwood remained silent. For days, news anchors and social media influencers speculated about the story. Would Eastwood finally break his silence? Would he confirm what Jim had revealed? Paparazzi swarmed outside his Malibu estate, hoping to get a statement. But true to his nature, Clint Eastwood didn't seek attention. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't go on TV. He didn't post a message online. He simply went about his life as if nothing had changed. This only made the public even more fascinated. If he wasn't denying it, then it had to be true, right? The story dominated headlines for over a week, and finally, after immense pressure, Eastwood agreed to sit down for an exclusive interview with one reporter. And, of course, the reporter chosen was Mark Turner, the man who broke the story in the first place. The interview took place in Clint Eastwood's private office, a rustic, minimalistic space filled with awards, film memorabilia, and one simple framed photo of him shaking hands with an unknown man. Mark Turner sat across from Eastwood, cameras rolling, knowing this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He wasted no time. "Mr. Eastwood, the world now knows about your act of kindness toward Jim Calloway. Why did you keep it a secret for so long?" Eastwood leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes calm, unwavering. "Because it wasn't about me." Turner blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the answer. "What do you mean?" Eastwood sighed. "Helping someone shouldn't be about getting credit. It should be about doing what's right." Turner nodded slowly. "But you're Clint Eastwood. You could have used your influence to bring more attention to struggling veterans." Eastwood's expression darkened slightly. "You think veterans don't already know they're struggling?" He shook his head. "They don't need another Hollywood guy talking about how much he cares. They need people to show up. They need real support, not just words." The room fell silent. Finally, Turner asked, "Would you do it again, knowing the world would eventually find out?" Eastwood smirked. "In a heartbeat." The interview aired on every major network, and the reaction was immediate. Fire veteran organizations saw a spike in donations. Fire celebrities praised Eastwood's humility and promised to do more for struggling veterans. Fire the government faced pressure to improve services for ex-military personnel. But most importantly, thousands of everyday Americans were inspired to take action. People across the country started reaching out to veteran organizations, offering jobs, housing, and financial support to former soldiers in need. Eastwood's actions had created a ripple effect, one that he had never sought, but one that was now changing countless lives. Sitting in his modest apartment, Jim watched the interview with tears in his eyes. 4 years, he had carried the weight of that secret. And now, the world finally knew what Clint Eastwood had done, not for recognition, but out of genuine kindness. That night, Jim wrote a simple message on social media. "I never expected the world to know what Clint did for me. But now that they do, I hope they realize one thing. Heroes don't just fight wars. Some heroes show up quietly, when no one is looking, and change a life forever." And in that moment, the world finally understood the true meaning of a Clint Eastwood story. Not one of bullets and showdowns, but one of compassion, honor, and the quiet heroism that defines real men. The impact of Clint Eastwood's secret act of kindness was far greater than anyone had anticipated. For years, Hollywood had been seen as a world of glamour, red carpets, and scripted charity efforts, but Eastwood's story broke that mold. His selfless act of helping a forgotten war veteran without seeking any recognition had become a national inspiration. But even after the world found out about it, he still didn't seek the spotlight. Instead, he continued doing what he had always done, working, creating, and living his life away from the unnecessary noise. But what happened to Jim Calloway? What lasting change did Eastwood's act inspire? This is how one small act of compassion turned into a movement. With his story now public, Jim Calloway found himself at the center of national attention. News anchors invited him to speak on talk shows, veteran organizations reached out to collaborate, and people from all across America sent him letters of support and gratitude. But Jim wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in paying it forward. "I don't need a TV appearance," Jim told a journalist during one of his rare interviews. "I just need more people to care. The way Clint cared." And so, he dedicated his life to doing exactly that. He expanded his work at veteran outreach centers, ensuring more resources were available for struggling ex-soldiers. He started speaking at schools, educating young Americans about the real cost of war and the struggles of veterans. He launched a program called No Soldier Left Behind, a grassroots initiative that connected veterans with people who could provide jobs, homes, and emotional support. Jim had gone from being a forgotten soldier on a bench to a voice of change for veterans everywhere. And all of it was because of Clint Eastwood. For months, Eastwood continued to ignore the buzz around his story. He had given one interview, and that was enough. But as the impact of his gesture kept growing, he was finally asked during a rare public appearance if he had anything to say about the movement he had unintentionally started. Eastwood, now in his 90s, simply gave his signature smirk and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do." That was classic Clint Eastwood, humble, direct, and uninterested in praise. But the world saw it differently. They saw it as a lesson, a reminder that real heroes don't always wear uniforms or appear on magazine covers. Sometimes, they walk among us quietly, doing the right thing without needing a thank you. The story of Clint Eastwood and Jim Calloway didn't just fade away after a few news cycles. Veteran funding increased, more programs were launched, and private organizations began stepping up to fill the gaps left by the government. Celebrities followed Eastwood's example. Some began directly funding veterans' rehabilitation efforts, while others launched charity initiatives without publicizing them. Regular Americans got involved. People adopted veterans in their communities, helped them with job placements, and even opened their homes to those who had nowhere to go. And Jim Calloway's initiative, No Soldier Left Behind, grew beyond his wildest dreams. Within a year, it had spread across multiple states, helping hundreds of veterans find housing, therapy, and jobs. Jim himself remained at the heart of it all, working day and night to ensure that no soldier, just like him, was ever forgotten again. A few years later, as Jim Calloway stood on a stage, accepting a humanitarian award for his work with veterans, he looked into the crowd and spotted a familiar face. Clint Eastwood, now older but still just as sharp, just as iconic, sat quietly in the back of the room. Jim chuckled to himself. Of course. No cameras. No grand entrance. Just Clint. Watching. Supporting. Just like always. After the event, Jim found him outside in the cool evening air, leaning against a car, his hands in his pockets. "Didn't think you'd show up," Jim said, approaching him with a grin. Eastwood smirked. "Well, I was in the neighborhood." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Jim took a deep breath and said, "I don't think I ever really thanked you." Eastwood shook his head. "You don't have to." Jim nodded, understanding. Because Clint Eastwood never did it for thanks. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And sometimes, that's all that matters. As time passed, Clint Eastwood's legendary career remained immortal. His films, his influence in Hollywood, his impact on cinema. But this story, his quiet, selfless act of kindness, became just as legendary as the characters he had played. Years later, when people spoke of Clint Eastwood, they didn't just talk about Dirty Harry or the man with no name. They spoke of the night he sat on a bench with a struggling veteran and decided to change a life. Not for attention. Not for an award. Just because he could. And that, more than any movie, any role, or any box office success, is what truly made Clint Eastwood a legend.